It was the kind of morning that small-town families dreamed about. The sun was warm, but not oppressive. The breeze gentle enough to stir the leaves without scattering papers or sending hats tumbling. The town's main park stretched out in a carpet of green, dotted with picnic blankets, strollers, and the occasional excited child sprinting toward the playground. From the bandstand at the park's center, the faint sound of acoustic guitar drifted, courtesy of a local musician strumming for tips. Sarah Miller sat on a blanket near the duck pond, sipping a coffee she'd bought from the little cart at the park entrance. Her 2-year-old daughter, Emily, was sitting cross-legged a few feet away, poking at dandelions with a stick and narrating an imaginary story in that adorable, half-understandable toddler speech. Every so often, Sarah's eyes scanned the park, a habit she had developed since Emily started walking, but she wasn't worried. This was her town. She knew the faces here. A crowd had begun to gather near the basketball courts where the local police department was setting up a small demonstration. 2 folding tables, a pop-up canopy, and a portable speaker were in place. A sign read, K9 Unit Public Demonstration. Meet our heroes. Parents were shepherding their kids closer. The promise of seeing a real police dog, too tempting to resist. From Sarah's angle, she could see the officer in charge, a tall man with a clean-shaven face and a neatly pressed uniform, the kind that somehow stayed immaculate, even when chasing suspects. Officer Mark Reynolds had been with the department for nearly 15 years, 10 of them on the K9 team. By his side sat Rex, a muscular German shepherd whose coat gleamed in the sun, black and tan in sharp contrast. Rex's eyes scanned the crowd, alert but calm, every movement betraying his intense training. Sarah didn't notice when Emily stopped playing with the dandelion and turned toward the demonstration. The toddler's eyes lit up the way they did when she spotted a dog anywhere, in a car window, on a sidewalk, even in picture books. Sarah smiled without looking away from her coffee. "Stay here, baby," she said absent-mindedly, but Emily was already on her feet. The little girl began toddling across the grass, her soft-soled shoes making almost no sound. The distance between the picnic blanket and the basketball courts wasn't far, but it was enough to make Sarah glance up again, this time catching sight of her daughter halfway to the police dog. Her first instinct was to call out, but she hesitated. Rex wasn't just any dog. He was under the watchful control of Officer Reynolds. The officer was greeting families warmly, shaking hands, letting children pat Rex's back under his supervision. Emily moved with the determined wobble of a toddler on a mission. Her small arms swung purposefully as she crossed the last stretch of grass, heading straight toward Rex. Officer Reynolds noticed her approach before Sarah could catch up. He smiled in the way experienced officers do when dealing with children. Gentle, reassuring. "Well, hello there," he said as Emily stopped just 2 feet away from Rex. Sarah arrived a second later, slightly out of breath. "Sorry, officer. She loves dogs," she said, reaching to take Emily's hand. But Reynolds raised a hand, a kind of subtle motion that communicated calm without a word. "It's all right," he assured her. "Rex is good with kids. As long as we go slow." Rex remained perfectly still, his training impeccable. His ears were pricked forward, his gaze fixed on Emily. Sarah thought she saw something curious in the dog's expression. Not just interest, but a kind of recognition, as if he'd spotted an old friend in the crowd. Emily tilted her head upward, meeting Rex's eyes without hesitation. She didn't giggle or squeal like most kids did around animals. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, the way someone does when they're about to tell a secret. Her lips moved, forming a phrase so quiet that even Sarah, standing right beside her, couldn't catch it. It was just 3 little words, whispered into the air between girl and dog. And then everything changed. Rex's posture shifted instantly. His ears snapped even higher, his body tensed, and his tail stopped moving. A low, rumbling growl rolled out from deep in his chest. The sound was so unexpected that several people in the crowd gasped. Sarah's heart jumped into her throat. She instinctively reached for Emily, but the officer stepped slightly forward, placing a calming hand near Rex's collar without pulling him back. "Easy, boy," Reynolds said softly, though his own voice held a note of surprise. He glanced at Emily, then back at Rex, trying to read the situation. Sarah expected the officer to move the dog away or ask them to step back, but instead he crouched lower, watching Rex carefully. The German Shepherd had stopped growling, but his entire frame was locked in that hyper-alert stance police dogs adopt when they've detected something unusual. Around them, the crowd fell silent. A few parents drew their children closer. Others leaned forward, intrigued. Emily didn't move away. She simply looked at Rex with calm, curious eyes, as if this was exactly the reaction she'd expected. Sarah's pulse raced. She had no idea what her daughter had whispered, but whatever it was, had pulled a reaction out of a highly disciplined dog. A reaction she was pretty sure no one here had seen before. Officer Reynolds' expression had shifted. He wasn't smiling anymore. His brows furrowed slightly, as though he was trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't been prepared for. The sun was still shining, the breeze still moving through the trees, but for the small cluster of people near the basketball courts, the air suddenly felt different, thicker, heavier. Something had just happened, something subtle yet powerful, and Sarah knew they were only at the beginning of understanding it. She couldn't have guessed that in just a few moments, curiosity would turn into questions, and questions would lead to revelations that no one in this quiet little town would ever forget. The air felt heavy around the small circle that had formed near the basketball courts. Children who had been laughing moments ago now stood frozen beside their parents, eyes wide. Rex's growl wasn't loud enough to frighten the whole crowd away, but it was deep, steady, and unmistakably serious. A dog like this didn't growl without reason, not after years of police training. Officer Reynolds kept one hand near Rex's collar, but he didn't pull the dog back. Instead, he studied Emily with the kind of sharp, practiced focus that came from years of reading human suspects and canine partners alike. The girl stood with tiny shoes planted firmly in the grass, not a flicker of fear on her face. Her small hands rested at her sides. Sarah reached out again, this time more urgently. "Emily, honey, let's step back." Emily didn't move. Her big brown eyes stayed locked on Rex's dark, intelligent gaze. If she was intimidated, she didn't show it. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, almost as if she was listening to something only she could hear. The growl faded. Rex shifted his weight, his muscles still tight, but no longer coiled in alarm. Then, without waiting for a command, he stepped forward, one slow, deliberate pace. Sarah's breath caught. The German Shepherd stopped directly, in front of Emily, towering over her tiny frame. Every instinct in Sarah screamed to pull her daughter away, but Officer Reynolds' calm demeanor held her in place. His voice was low, measured. "Hold still," he murmured, more to Emily than to Sarah. Rex sniffed the air around the toddler's face. Then, in a move that made the crowd murmur, he circled her once, his steps precise, his nose brushing briefly against her shoulder, as if cataloging her scent. When he finished his circle, he sat down beside her, perfectly upright, eyes still on her face. "That's different," Reynolds muttered under his breath. Different was an understatement. Rex was trained to either remain neutral with civilians or look to Reynolds for cues. This was neither. This was something else entirely, an unprompted act of proximity and attention that broke every pattern the officer had seen in their years together. "What did you say to him?" Reynolds asked gently. Emily blinked up at him, her expression unreadable. "I told him it's okay now," she said simply, as if that explained everything. Those 4 words seemed to land heavily on the officer. His brow furrowed, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sarah, still hovering protectively, tried to brush it off with a laugh. Kids say the funniest things, right? But Reynolds wasn't laughing. He was staring at Rex, and Rex was still staring at Emily. The onlookers whispered among themselves. A few kids tried to ask their parents why the dog liked the little girl so much. Parents shushed them without offering explanations, because they didn't have any. Sarah crouched beside Emily, giving her a quick once-over, as if expecting to find a half-eaten snack in her pocket, or a toy that might have caught the dog's attention. There was nothing. Emily had been playing with a stick in the grass before wandering over. No treats, no squeaky toys, nothing that would explain why. A working canine was suddenly acting as if this toddler was the center of his world. Officer Reynolds straightened, glancing around at the crowd. "Folks, if you could give us a little space," he called out, his voice steady but authoritative. The group shuffled back a few feet, though their curiosity didn't wane. Every set of eyes stayed fixed on the strange little scene. "Emily," Sarah said carefully, "why don't we thank the nice officer and say goodbye to the dog now?" Emily didn't answer. She reached out and rested her small hand lightly on the top of Rex's head. The dog didn't flinch, didn't move away, but his posture changed. The stiffness melted into something softer, more protective. He let out a short, low huff through his nose, the kind of sound dogs make when they've decided they trust someone. Reynolds was watching this closely, his mind turning over possibilities. He had handled countless public events with Rex. Kids had pulled the dog's ears, hugged him, even tried to ride him, and Rex had always reacted with calm tolerance or gentle avoidance. This was different. This was active engagement, as if Rex had just discovered something profoundly important. Sarah looked from her daughter to the officer. Is this normal?" Reynolds shook his head slowly. "No, not for him." The officer crouched down, so he was eye level with Emily. "You like Rex, huh?" Emily nodded. "I know him," she said plainly. Sarah's brow furrowed. "Honey, you've never met him before." Emily didn't argue. She just looked back at Rex, smiling faintly. The words sent a faint shiver down Reynolds' spine, though he couldn't have said exactly why. He opened his mouth to ask another question, but before he could, Rex did something that made him freeze. The dog leaned forward and pressed his forehead gently against Emily's chest, an action that, in their years of working together, Reynolds had only ever seen in the field. When Rex found someone who was lost, hurt, or in danger, it was his way of saying, "You're safe now." The gesture wasn't just strange, it was eerily familiar. The officer glanced up at Sarah. "Has she ever been around police dogs before?" "No," Sarah said firmly. "We don't even have pets." "She's barely been around dogs at all." Reynolds kept his eyes on Rex, his mind flicking back to a memory he hadn't thought about in months. A dimly lit warehouse, a frightened boy, and this same dog making that same gesture. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't something he could brush off as a child being cute. It was something he needed to understand. The crowd was still watching, waiting for the officer to say something, to explain what they were seeing. But Reynolds didn't have an explanation. Not yet. Instead, he stood, gently tapped Rex's side, and said, "Stay." The dog didn't move from Emily's side. Reynolds tried again, sharper this time. "Rex, stay." The dog's ears twitched. He flicked his gaze toward the officer, and then back to Emily, refusing to leave her. That stubborn defiance, from a dog who normally followed every command without hesitation, sent another ripple of unease through Reynolds. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. Is something wrong? Reynolds didn't answer right away. His mind was too busy with questions. No, not just questions. Memories. The silence around the basketball courts was unnatural, like the air just before a thunderstorm. Children shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension without understanding it. Parents whispered, exchanging quick glances, unsure whether to pull their kids away or keep watching. Sarah's pulse thudded in her ears. She had no idea why this dog was acting so strangely toward Emily, but the scene had drawn every set of eyes in the park. She crouched next to her daughter again, placing a steadying hand on her arm. "Honey, I think it's time we—" Before she could finish, Officer Reynolds spoke. "Hold on a second." His voice was calm, but edged with something sharper. Curiosity, maybe even urgency. Sarah straightened, startled by the firmness in his tone. She opened her mouth to object, but the officer's gaze wasn't on her. It was locked on Emily. And Rex. The dog still hadn't moved from the toddler's side. His tall, lean frame was angled slightly toward her, as if shielding her from something unseen. Every so often, his nose twitched, sniffing the air near her, but his eyes, those deep, amber eyes, never left her face. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. "What did you say to him earlier?" Reynolds asked, crouching so he was eye level with Emily. His voice had softened again, coaxing. "Right when you walked up." "I couldn't hear it." Emily tilted her head slightly, thinking. Then she answered without hesitation, her voice steady and clear enough for the people nearby to hear. "I told him it's okay now." The words seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have, as though the breeze had paused just to carry them farther. Sarah blinked. That's all you said?" Emily nodded. Reynolds didn't speak right away. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing slightly. It was a simple phrase, but to him, it wasn't simple at all. In his mind, it echoed back to a night that had nothing to do with sunshine and playgrounds. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. A man in the back chuckled nervously, muttering something about kids saying random things. But Reynolds didn't look amused. He glanced down at Rex, who had gone completely still again, ears angled toward Emily like twin antennae picking up a private signal. "Where did you hear that?" he asked her. Emily gave a small shrug. "I don't know. I just know." Sarah frowned, crouching again. "Emily, sweetheart, that's not something Mommy or Daddy ever said to you, right?" "No," Emily said simply. Reynolds' thoughts started to race. That phrase, "it's okay now," was a specific, deliberate signal in his work with Rex. It wasn't part of any public demo. It wasn't in the scripts they used for school visits or parades. It was something he only said in the field, after Rex had found a missing person or neutralized a threat. The last time he'd used it was months ago, after locating a missing child during a high-stakes search. And that child? No. He shook the thought off. That was impossible. Sarah noticed the shift in his expression. "Is something wrong?" Reynolds hesitated, glancing at the circle of onlookers. The last thing he wanted was to start a rumor in the middle of a community event. "No," he said carefully. "Just unusual." He tried to tap his thigh to get Rex to return to a heel position. Normally, that small gesture was enough. This time, the dog's only movement was to press slightly closer to Emily, the edge of his flank brushing her leg. Sarah's confusion deepened. "Why is he doing that?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Reynolds said, though his mind was already circling a theory he didn't like. Someone from the crowd called out, "Is this part of the show?" Their tone was light, but there was a ripple of genuine curiosity behind it. Reynolds gave a polite smile over his shoulder. "No, this isn't part of the demo." That only made the whispers grow louder. Emily reached out again, resting her tiny hand on Rex's head. The dog's eyes softened, his breathing steadying, and he let out a faint sigh through his nose. It wasn't submission. It was relief. Sarah shook her head, still baffled. I don't understand. She's just a little kid. She doesn't know anything about police dogs or commands or... She trailed off, realizing she was rambling. Reynolds, meanwhile, was studying every inch of Rex's posture, the slight forward lean, the gentle positioning beside Emily, the way his tail rested still on the grass. It all pointed to one thing. This wasn't a coincidence. He crouched. Lower, speaking softly to Emily again. You've never met Rex before today, right? Emily's gaze didn't waver. I know him, she said simply. Sarah gave a nervous laugh. She says that about everyone she likes. But Reynolds wasn't convinced. His mind flashed back again to that night in the abandoned warehouse. He remembered Rex finding this little boy hiding in the shadows, trembling, refusing to move until Reynolds had repeated those exact same words. It's okay now. The boy had clung to Rex, whispering something the officer couldn't hear. But the look on Rex's face back then, alert, focused, protective, was exactly what he was seeing now. It made no sense. He looked at Emily again, trying to read her in the same way he read suspects. But there was no deception there. No performance. Just innocence. Emily, he said, when you say it's okay now, who are you talking to? She thought about it for a moment, then shrugged. Him, she said, patting Rex's head. I'm telling him he doesn't have to worry anymore. Reynolds felt something cold crawl down his spine. He opened his mouth to press further. But before he could, Rex moved again. A small shift, placing himself directly between Emily and the rest of the crowd. It was subtle, but to a trained eye, it was unmistakable. He was guarding her. Reynolds stood slowly, scanning the circle of onlookers. All right, folks, he said, we're going to take a short break. His tone made it sound casual, but there was an unspoken authority in it. People began to disperse reluctantly, though many lingered nearby, pretending to check their phones while stealing glances. When the circle had thinned, Reynolds turned to Sarah. I'd like to ask you both a few more questions, if that's all right. Sarah hesitated. Is there a problem? Reynolds glanced down at Rex, who was still glued to. Emily sighed. That's what I'm trying to find out, he said quietly. Sarah's grip on her daughter's hand tightened just a little. Somewhere deep inside, Reynolds knew this was the beginning of something bigger than a strange moment. At a park, and whatever it was, it wasn't over yet. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with a strange, almost electric anticipation. Word of the bizarre incident had already leaked out. Some thought it was a joke. Others believed it was a publicity stunt. But for the people who had been in that hallway yesterday, who had seen that powerful K9 suddenly bow his head at a toddler's whispered words, there was no doubt something extraordinary had taken place. Officer Daniels arrived early. Max, his partner, trotted beside him. But the dog was different. He was still disciplined, still obedient, but there was a softness to his eyes, as though something had shifted deep inside him. Daniels noticed it too, though he tried not to admit it. Trained K9 South didn't just change overnight. They didn't form new habits in a day. But here Max was, breaking the rules in subtle ways, gazing toward the hallway where they had met the little girl, sniffing the air as though expecting her return. Inside the courtroom, the trial was already set to. Resume. The case was tense, gang-related, high stakes, and with witnesses afraid to testify. Max's job was to assist in security and sniff out any possible threats. Daniels gave him the usual commands, and Max obeyed flawlessly. But as the jury filed in, Max's head turned toward the door. His ears twitched. Daniels followed his gaze. And his breath caught. The toddler Lily was back. She was seated in the gallery, held gently in her mother's arms. The mother looked nervous, clutching her daughter protectively. Daniels remembered yesterday how the woman had been wary of Max at first. Now, however, she looked purposeful, as though she'd made a decision overnight. Lily's eyes locked on Max the instant they entered the room. It was uncanny, the way the dog froze mid-step, tail stiffening before wagging in small, restrained motions. Daniels couldn't believe it. Max had been trained never to break focus during active duty, yet here he was, clearly recognizing her. Judge Raymond entered, calling the court to order. The attorneys prepared their notes, and Daniels forced himself to focus. Still, the connection between the girl and the dog was impossible to ignore. And then came the moment that made Daniels. Stomach twist, the little girl leaned toward her mother and whispered something. Though her voice was too low to carry across the room, Max's reaction was immediate. His ears perked. His tail wagged once. Then, as though compelled, he moved 2 careful steps forward. Daniels tightened the leash instantly. "Max, heel," he ordered in a sharp whisper. Max froze, but didn't look at Daniels. His gaze was locked on Lily. The judge hadn't noticed yet, but a few jurors had. Some smiled faintly, thinking it was harmless. Daniels knew better. K9 South didn't fixate on people without reason. Either Lily was a hidden threat, which seemed absurd for a child, or something in her presence triggered something deeply embedded in the dog's training. As testimony began, Daniels kept Max positioned at his side. But the strange undercurrent in the room was undeniable. Whenever the opposing attorney raised his voice, or the witness hesitated under cross-examination, Max's gaze flicked to Lily, not to the noise, not to the tension, but to her, as though she was somehow guiding his response. At one point, a sudden outburst came from the defendant's family. A chair scraped loudly. A man stood and shouted an objection from the gallery. The bailiffs moved quickly, and Daniels felt Max tense beside him. The dog's instincts flared ready to intervene, but instead of lunging toward the source of the commotion, he looked to Lily first. She didn't speak this time. She simply looked at him, and the tension in his body eased in seconds. Daniels was unsettled. This wasn't training. This was communication. And it was happening silently, without commands, without reward pews. Max was responding as if this little girl had authority over him. When the court recessed for lunch, Daniels made a decision. He approached Lily and her mother in the hallway, his voice low and cautious. "Ma'am, your daughter. Have you ever been around police dogs before?" The mother shook her head, eyes wary. "No, we've never even had a pet." Daniels studied Lily, who stared back with an expression far too calm for a child. Surrounded by armed officers and tense strangers. "Yesterday," he said carefully, "she whispered something to Max. Do you remember what it was?" Lily tilted her head, almost shy. Then, in a small but clear voice, she said, "I told him it's okay. I told him he doesn't have to be scared." Daniels blinked. "Scared, ma'am? This dog has been trained for bomb detection, suspect apprehension. He doesn't get scared." But Lily's expression was gentle, almost pitying. "Everybody gets scared," she said softly, "even when they don't tell you." Daniels felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold hallway air. He glanced at Max, who was now sitting quietly beside Lily, his gaze fixed on her as if she were the only person in the building. When the trial resumed, Daniels watched, more closely than ever, and he began to see the micro-reactions in Max's body. Whenever tension in the room rose, Max would glance at Lily, and her calm gaze or faint nod would keep him still. Daniels couldn't explain it, but by mid-afternoon he stopped trying. It wasn't until the day ended and court adjourned that the unthinkable happened again. As people filed out, Max, still on his leash, moved without hesitation toward Lily. Daniels was ready to pull him back, but the judge, still on the bench, noticed and raised a hand. "Officer," Judge Raymond called, "let the dog go." It was an odd command, but Daniels obeyed. Max padded over to Lily, sat in front of her, and lowered his head. Lily reached out with both hands and held his face gently. The entire courtroom fell silent. Then, in a voice just loud enough for everyone to hear, Lily said, "You did good today." Daniel's chest tightened. He absolutely knew that Max understood her. But it was what happened next that made Daniel's pulse race. Max, breaking every rule of decorum, turned his head and barked once. Not a sharp, aggressive bark. A single, low, deliberate sound. Judge Raymond leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Officer Daniels," he said slowly, "what does one bark mean in your canine's training?" Daniels swallowed hard. "One bark means threat confirmed." The room froze. The room fell silent except for the sharp echo of the canine's bark. It wasn't the casual, alert sound officers often heard. It was insistent, rhythmic, and charged with urgency. Detective Harris, still clutching the evidence folder, turned to look at Shadow. The dog's eyes were locked on Emma, the toddler, who had stopped playing with her toy car and was now staring back at the German Shepherd with wide, unblinking eyes. Emma's mother, Lauren, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. She wasn't sure if she was more afraid of the officer's sudden attention or the fact that the dog seemed to be communicating something specific. Shadow let out another sharp bark and then moved closer to Emma, his tail held stiff. His nose twitched rapidly, not in the way dogs sniff out scents from food or people, but in a calculated, searching manner as though trying to detect something hidden. Officer Ramirez, Shadow's handler, quickly stepped forward. "Shadow, heel," he commanded, but the canine ignored him and instead gently nudged Emma's leg with his nose. Emma tilted her head and whispered something so quietly that the adults almost missed it. "Doggy says bad man." The words froze everyone. Detective Harris exchanged a startled glance with Ramirez. "What did she just say?" Harris asked, his voice low, almost as if saying it too loudly would shatter the fragile moment. Lauren looked at her daughter. "Emma, sweetheart, what do you mean?" Emma frowned, as if frustrated that no one understood her. "Doggy says bad man hurt lady. He wants to tell you." A chill ran down Ramirez's spine. Shadow was trained for detection drugs, explosives, human scent tracking, but there had never been a scenario in which a dog communicated through a child. He crouched down to Emma's level. "Emma, did Shadow talk to you?" She nodded, her curls bouncing. "In my head, he shows me pictures. Like a dream." Lauren let out a shaky laugh. "She has a big imagination," she said, though her voice trembled as though she wasn't entirely convinced. But then Shadow barked again, 2 sharp bursts, and trotted toward the evidence board on the wall. He stood in front of a pinned photo of a suspect, Martin Cole, a man the detectives had questioned but released due to lack of evidence. Shadow's paw tapped the photo, his nails clicking on the glossy paper. The room collectively inhaled. Ramirez stared at his partner, in disbelief. "Shadow's never done that before," he muttered. Detective Harris, now deeply unsettled, motioned for Lauren and Emma to stay put. He approached the evidence board, eyes narrowing on the photo. "If Shadow's reacting to Cole, there's a reason," Harris said. Emma piped up again. Bad man has a red hat. Shadow showed me." Ramirez froze. "We never released that detail to the public," he said. The suspect in the eyewitness account was seen wearing a red baseball cap. Lauren's face paled. "You're saying my daughter just knew that?" From the dog? Harris didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the phone on the desk and called for a unit to bring Cole in for questioning. While the adults discussed logistics, Emma knelt down beside Shadow and gently patted his head. "Don't worry," she whispered. "I told them. They'll listen now." Shadow leaned into her touch, his body language calm for the first time since entering the room. But there was still a sharpness in his eyes, a message not yet delivered. Emma noticed it instantly. "Oh," she said softly. "He says there's more." The statement sent a shiver down Harris's spine. "More?" he asked, crouching near her. Emma nodded. "He says the lady is not far, but time is running out." The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Harris felt the weight of every second. If what this child was saying was true, if Shadow had somehow conveyed a critical lead, then the case wasn't just about finding a suspect anymore. It was a race against the clock. Lauren clutched Emma protectively, torn between disbelief and the growing fear that her daughter was entangled in something far more dangerous than they had imagined. Harris stood, his voice firm. "Ramirez, get Shadow in the SUV. We're going after Cole now. If there's even a chance this is real. We can't waste time." As they moved out, Emma reached for Shadow's collar and whispered again, "Show me more." Shadow's ears perked, and for a moment, it looked as if the dog understood perfectly. By the time they exited the precinct, the tension in the air was so thick that even the late afternoon sun felt muted. Somewhere in the city, a woman's life might be hanging in the balance, and the only two who seemed to know exactly where to look were a 3-year-old girl and a trained K9. The hunt had just taken a terrifying turn. The command center was tense. Detectives huddled around a conference table, covered in crime scene photos, maps, and evidence bags. The toddler's unexpected interaction with Max, the K9, had rattled everyone. Officer Daniels replayed the body cam footage for the third time, slowing down the moment when Lily whispered her strange phrase. They watched Max's ears perk up, his gaze sharpen, and his body stiffen. It was as if he understood something none of them could. Daniels leaned forward. "This isn't random." Max recognized that phrase. His voice carried a weight that silenced the chatter. The question is why. They decided to run Max through a controlled test. In the training yard behind the precinct, Lily stood holding her mother's hand, looking small against the imposing silhouette of the German Shepherd. The handler gave standard commands: sit, stay, heel, and Max obeyed perfectly, his discipline flawless. Then Daniels asked Lily to repeat her words. The instant she spoke, Max's demeanor changed. He pivoted sharply, tail rigid, eyes locking onto the chain-link fence bordering the yard. He growled low in his throat, pulling against the leash toward the alley beyond. The officers exchanged startled glances. Max wasn't reacting to Lily, he was reacting to something else entirely. The alley had been checked before, nothing suspicious. But Daniels trusted Max more than he trusted any human witness. They followed his lead. The K9 dragged them to a pile of old pallets, stacked haphazardly against the brick wall. His claws scraped frantically at the boards until one officer pulled them aside, revealing a black duffel bag wedged deep inside. When they unzipped it, the smell hit first pungent, chemical, wrong. Inside were bricks of a substance wrapped in plastic, alongside a pistol and several envelopes stuffed with cash. "That's not just evidence," muttered Detective Carter. "That's a war chest." But one thing bothered Daniels. This alley was nearly 2 blocks from the original scene. How did Max know to connect it to Lily's words? Back at the station, they reviewed old case files. The phrase Lily had said matched a code word from an unsolved narcotics case 3 years earlier, one where the main suspect had vanished before trial, The suspect's known accomplice? A man recently spotted near Lily's neighborhood. The realization sent a chill through Daniels. The code word wasn't just random. Lily must have overheard it somewhere. But if she had, it meant someone dangerous had been close to her, and possibly still was. Max's restless behavior that night confirmed it. In his kennel, he paced instead of sleeping, growling at shadows. A handler swore he'd never seen the dog so unsettled. By morning, Daniels had a theory. Someone had been watching the investigation from nearby. Someone Max sensed, but couldn't reach. And if that someone knew Lily had spoken the code word, she could be in danger. The team moved quickly. They relocated Lily and her mother to a safe house without telling the press. But Daniels noticed something strange during the drive. Max refused to sit still in the back of the K9 unit, eyes fixed on every passing car, ears twitching at every sound. Halfway to the safe house, a black SUV appeared in the rearview mirror, keeping a suspiciously steady distance. Daniels tapped the dashboard radio. "We've got a tail." The unmarked escort vehicle immediately adjusted course, but the SUV followed. When they turned down a rural road toward the safe house, it sped up. Max exploded into frantic barking, lunging at the glass. The SUV swerved suddenly, pulling ahead before disappearing down a side road. They didn't chase. It was too risky with Lily in the car. But Daniels knew this was no coincidence. That night, Lily sat in the safe house living room, quietly coloring. Max lay beside her, head on his paws, but his amber eyes never left the door. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows, masking the distant hum of a vehicle slowing in the street. Daniels, watching from the kitchen, felt the hair on his neck stand up. He reached for his sidearm, just as Max's ears shot forward. The dog stood, muscles taut, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Someone was out there. The moment stretched, silent except for the rain, until the sharp crack of glass breaking shattered it. Max launched toward the sound before anyone could react. The air in the courtroom was so tense it felt like it could snap. Every seat was taken. Rows of reporters leaned forward with pens ready. Families of both the victim and the accused sat stiffly, their eyes darting toward the witness stand. "Officer." Daniels entered with Max at his side, the canine's ears high, movements deliberate. He led Max to the front, where the judge had approved a special demonstration. But before Daniels could speak, the defense attorney smirked, muttering something about circus theatrics, loud enough for the jury to hear. No one had expected the next move. The prosecutor gently brought Lily the toddler to the stand. She sat in the big wooden chair, her tiny legs swinging back and forth, not even reaching the edge. A small microphone was adjusted to her height. The judge explained she didn't have to answer anything she didn't want to. Officer Daniels watched from a few feet away, his hand resting on Max's harness. The prosecutor's voice softened. "Lily, do you remember the nice dog from the park?" Her big eyes flicked toward Max. "Max," she said softly, smiling. The courtroom chuckled lightly, but Max's reaction was startling. His posture shifted instantly, eyes locking onto Lily, tail wagging in slow, deliberate sweeps. He stepped forward without a command, nose twitching. Daniels tensed. K9 South never broke protocol like that. "Lily," the prosecutor continued, "can you tell us what you said to Max that day?" The girl hesitated, glancing at her mother, who nodded reassuringly. She leaned toward the mic and whispered two short words. The moment the syllables left her lips, Max's head shot up, ears stiff, tail frozen mid-swing. Then, without command, he lunged toward the defense table, stopping just inches away from the accused. Gasps erupted. The accused jerked back. In his chair, face draining of color. Two deputies stepped in, hands ready. Daniel's voice boomed across the room. "Max, heel!" But Max didn't move. His teeth were bared, not snapping, but holding steady, every muscle in his body taut. The prosecutor turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this is a trained scent alert unsolicited, triggered by the same phrase the child spoke in the park. This is not coincidence." The defense attorney shot to his feet, shouting objections, claiming theatrics, claiming manipulation. But even the jury was watching Max's behavior with wide, uneasy eyes. The judge's gavel came down hard. "Order." In the court. Daniels finally called Max back, the dog reluctantly retreating to his side. The accused's breathing was shallow now, sweat beading along his hairline. The judge looked over the room. "Given what we've just seen," he said slowly, "I will allow the jury to consider this demonstration as part of their deliberations." The air buzzed with a new kind of tension, not just suspense, but a creeping sense that the truth had been waiting all along, hidden in the simplest of words, from the smallest witness. And everyone knew that tomorrow's session would be explosive. The courtroom was silent, except for the steady ticking of the old wall clock. Everyone knew today could change everything. The jury had returned early, and the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Officer Daniels stood near Max, who lay quietly, but alert at his feet. The toddler Lily sat on her mother's lap, her small fingers gripping the fabric of her dress as her wide eyes scanned the room. The accused man, pale and sweating, avoided eye contact, his jaw clenched tightly. The judge called the court to order and instructed the jury to focus on the evidence presented, including the unique interaction between Lily and Max. The prosecutor's closing argument was deliberate, carefully weaving together testimony, forensic data, and the unusual bond between child and dog. "Ladies and gentlemen," the prosecutor said, voice steady, "we have before us a case not just about evidence on paper, but about instinct, trust, and truth revealed in unexpected ways." Max, the trained K9, responded unequivocally to a phrase spoken by a toddler, a phrase only known in specific circumstances related to this case. This connection led us to uncover hidden evidence that corroborates the victim's testimony. It is undeniable that the accused is linked to the crime. The defense attorney's rebuttal tried to dismiss the dog's reaction as coincidence and the child's words as imagination. But the jury's faces told a different story: curiosity, concern, and a dawning realization. As the jury retired, the courtroom buzzed with quiet conversations. Daniels knelt beside Lily, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "You did good, kiddo," he said softly. Lily smiled shyly. "Max helped," she whispered. Minutes later, the jury returned, faces somber but resolute. The four-person stood, voice clear. "We find the defendant guilty as charged." A collective breath seemed to release from the courtroom. Relief, justice, closure all mingled in the air. Outside, reporters swarmed, but Daniels and Lily slipped away quietly. The bond between the little girl and the dog had not only solved a case, but had reminded everyone present of the power of unexpected connections. Weeks later, a ceremony honored Max and the officers involved. Lily was invited, a tiny figure, proudly wearing a miniature badge. As she stood beside Max, she whispered again, "It's okay now." Max's tail wagged, and his eyes gleamed with something close to understanding. In that moment, the impossible had become real proof that sometimes the simplest words from the smallest voices can trigger unthinkable reactions and change lives forever.